for the Pacifica Radio Network. Welcome to a special edition of Planet Waves FM. This is for Tuesday, the 26th of July, 2016. This is a supplemental edition to the regular program that's also available right now, and I have decided to separate off this bit because it contains an interview with a guy by the name of Robert Schmidt from down in Maryland. Robert Schmidt is a research astrologer, and he's also the co-founder of Project Hindsight and currently the leader of that project, which began in 1993 in an effort to retrieve astrological texts, ancient astrological texts, and translate them accurately so that astrologers had some sense of their own heritage. Not merely some sense, but actual accurate documentation of what came before us. Up to that time, first of all, there was not all that much interest in it, and it was very difficult to find. The history of astrology was a kind of a hazy thing that most people didn't really have a clue about, including some pretty erudite and talented astrologers. And so Project Hindsight addressed that void of information. Astrology has never been particularly well respected by the Academy, by the way, and so while there were many other translations of texts from that era, the astrological texts were not generally translated or translated accurately, and so astrologers had to take this on and do it themselves. There were three principal partners of Project Hindsight at the outset: Robert Zoller, Robert Hand, and Robert Schmidt, who I refer to as Bob. And one of the things that distinguishes Bob's work is that he stuck with Greek astrology, while Zoller and Hand studied and translated and worked through and have lectured on many different types of astrology, particularly medieval astrology. It was Bob Schmidt who stuck with Hellenistic astrology, which he calls Greek astrology, and has developed that. And one of the things that they figured out pretty early on, and that I knew about back in the mid-2000s when I had my first conversation specifically about this subject with Bob Schmidt and his wife Ellen Black Coffey, is that there was a founding era of astrology. There are references in the literature to founders of astrology, and one of those founders went by the name, it was not known initially whether it was a pen name or a real name, Hermes Trismegistus. I hope I'm saying that right. I don't hear it very often. Okay, so there was this idea that they began to work with, as referenced in the literature, that there were founders of this, that astrology did not come on a ship from Atlantis, or it was not cracked open out of an Egyptian pyramid, but the astrology that we know, which I want to be careful to distinguish, is Greek astrology as separate from what the Egyptians were doing, as separate from what the Babylonians were doing, as separate from what the Mayans and the Aztecs were doing in different parts of the world. Obviously, astrology is a kind of a thing that finds its way into every society, and then there's quite a bit of cross-pollination. But what Bob has discovered, and with significant help from Ellen, who handled a major portion of this particular investigation, is that the astrology that we do, Greek astrology, which is the foundation of Western astrology, which includes ideas like Venus rules Taurus and the moon rules Cancer, and Saturn is exalted in Libra, the things we take for granted as being astrologically true, come from Greek astrology, approximately the 4th century BC. And not only that, but their origins are not actually, when you read the literature, as Bob has done for many years, 23 years or so, it points to people, and in particular points to someone who they have deduced is Eudoxus of Knidos, a mathematician and astronomer extremely famous in his day, one of the great mathematicians from the classical Greek era, and considered one of the great mathematicians of all time. And so already a kind of an inventor, codified the system, is what they're saying, the system that we use for classical astrology, which includes the earliest astrological document known called the Thema Mundi. I will attach that. It doesn't look very interesting on the outside, but when you start to go through the layers and pry into it and look at what it infers, and when you add a few other layers, which we get into in our conversation, it's quite a beautiful thing. It's the approximate equivalent of what the circle of fifths is to music theory. At the end of the discussion, I asked Bob about the relationship between music and astrology in the founding era, because that circle of fifths and that Thema Mundi look really quite similar. And the astrological method and the method of doing music theory, which comes out of Greece, are so strikingly similar that I thought there might be a connection. Turns out that Eudoxus's teacher, one of his teachers, Greek teachers, was one of the inventors of what today we think of as music theory. So they are, in a sense, astrology is partly a derivative of music theory. We cover that in the last 15 minutes of the conversation. I had always suspected that there was a connection. These two diagrams are so similar, and that there are so many astrologers who are also musicians. It is no accident that so many of us are obsessed by music, and it's nice to do music because it gives, we astrologers spend a lot of time in our minds, a lot of times theorizing and writing and explaining things in very rational Greek terms, which is a very left brain activity, and music provides the freedom and the space to play with a more intuitive right brain type of activity, where the reasoning process does not have to be so nailed down, where mathematics doesn't make so much sense, but imagery and poetry do make more sense. And so there, in a sense, astrology has its counterpart in music. So we get to that at the end. But what I basically do in this conversation is I take, I'm your representative with Bob Schmidt, right? So I start the conversation with the Thema Mundi, with this teaching chart, which is the chart that places Cancer in the ascendant. And so one of the radical things about the discovery of the Thema Mundi and the understanding of what this thing is reveals that the association that we have between Aries and the first house is not entirely accurate. Aries is the first sign. Of course, it's going to have some resonance with the first house, but in the first chart, in the chart that is the teaching tool and that is, in a sense, the decryption key to all of astrology, this very simple, deceivingly simple, like many things from science and esoteric teaching, has Cancer in the ascendant, therefore Scorpio on the 5th, Aries on the 10th. And I was aware of this as early as 2006 and began applying it to my work with great success. We also talk about whole sign houses, equal houses, the use of house systems such as equal or, in my case, Coke, superimposed over whole sign houses, what the real definition of a house cusp is, which I also learned from reading the book Whole Sign Houses by Robert Hand. This is confirmed from a similar thread of research. And this is mainly presented for your information and kind of intellectual adventure. Now, I'm aware that there are people who don't like this theory, and they say that it can't possibly be true and that nothing traces back to one person. I want to be clear, it's my understanding that Eudoxus did not do this alone. He had collaborators, but was something like the principal author of a highly integrated system that works pretty darned well for a 2,400-year-old device, kind of like mathematics works well to this day. So anyway, without meandering around here too much, let's let the conversation that Bob and I had yesterday do the work. I do welcome your comments. Depending on where you're listening to this, it is possible to register for either one of the Planet Waves blogs, either Planet Waves, members.planetwaves.net. It's a free registration if you'd like to take part in the conversation there, or you're welcome to advance the conversation on my personal Facebook page, so we can keep that in one place on Facebook, though of course we post to all of them. I consider this to be big news in the world of astrology, and truly exciting. I do concede that I have had 10 years to get used to the concept of the Thema Mundi, of the founders and the principal founder, Hermes, who, that's not his name, they seem to all use pen names to do this work. There's another guy named Asclepius, and there's one other one. I believe there are two other people considered founders. I've had time to get used to these ideas. 10 years is a while to think about something. And I've had 10 years to work with the Thema Mundi. You are probably hearing about this for the first time today, and I recognize you haven't had that much time. In any event, I present this for your interest. I'm truly curious your feedback. You are welcome to email me at efc@ericfrancis.com. I will gladly pass along any comments you have to Bob Schmidt and Ellen Black. And without further delay, here is my conversation from the morning of July 25th, 2016. I was in Kingston, and Bob was down in Cumberland, Maryland. Here you go. I'd like to welcome to Planet Waves FM Robert Schmidt, someone that I've been listening to for about 20 years. I believe I met you first in the summer of 1996, Bob. And
I think that's right. It was at the Ithaca Conclave, right?
Yeah, Phase 3,
yeah.
Where your beautiful partner, Ellen Black Coffee, was running around with coffee pots. So my friend and I named her Ellen Black Coffee because she was always seen traversing the front of the room with a pot of coffee. So that was everybody got got a new name at that conference, at least in our little section of the audience. And so, by way of saying that I'm accustomed to these ideas in a way that people who are just being introduced to Project Hindsight material might not be, and then in addition, the kind of cult of classical astrology has taken off among young astrologers, but they are jumping in the middle of the story, and I think that, as you're indicating in some of your work, there's some context issues with that. And so, I'm going to be the moderator between you and the audience, and I know enough to ask the occasional intelligent question, and thank you for really enriching my astrology studies and my practice, first of all.
Well, you're welcome. That's what I'm trying to do, I think.
The Thema Mundi, we did our first piece on the Thema Mundi 10 years ago, and I put that to work immediately. And so it's never out of my mind when I'm reading a wheel. I'm always looking for the signs in relationship to the Cancer ascendant of that sign, and always keep my eye on 15 degrees and so forth. But anyway, let's start at the beginning. I got an email on Thursday night, right around the time of the full moon, that said Eudoxus did it. I'm like, wow, they've gone public with their discovery.
Yeah, and they've also gone nonlinear and maybe a little crazy.
Yes, and how many people understood that email when they saw it? Like, how many had that flash of recognition? I don't know. But I was sitting in a cafe in New Paltz, New York, and I thought, wow, this is big news. And the first thing I did was I called up David Arner, one of my teachers and the person who introduced me to Project Hindsight, and said, hey, I just got an email from Schmidt that said who the probable inventor of astrology was.
Greek astrology.
Greek astrology, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Greek astrology, which you're saying is the astrology that we do, pretty much.
Yes.
Go ahead.
The Greek astrology is the beginning of what we would call Western astrology. I mean, we use largely the same, modern astrology uses largely the same collection of what people call techniques, except it's quite reduced from what it was originally. Lots and lots of techniques and concepts that belong to the original Greek system are no longer in evidence in modern astrology. But I don't think it's a stretch to say that Western astrology begins during the Greek period.
And we're talking about the 4th century BC.
If we're talking about Eudoxus, we're talking about the classical period. Now, the novelty of our claim is that the astrology began during the 4th century with Eudoxus, whereas it has hitherto been thought that it began in the Hellenistic era, probably in the 2nd or 1st century BC, and this has sort of been established, accepted doctrine by virtually all scholars. And what we're saying is that it actually began about 200 years earlier than that, and that Eudoxus of Cnidos was the originator or progenitor of the astrology that later sort of appears or comes on the scene during the Hellenistic period. Mm-hmm. So that implies that there was a period of time during which it was being developed pretty much, you might say, in secret. At least there's no evidence of that earlier activity. And so that's the claim.
Right. I used to call this the mystery school theory, which is that based on what I learned from you, I figured, all right, there may have been this phase where the practice of astrology was underground, and it comes to the surface all at once in the 1st or 2nd century BC, as you're suggesting, right?
Yes, that's
but you're
right.
saying it was practiced before then. And where I picked up the story with you about 10 years ago, you seem to be on to the fact of the founders and the founding era.
Yes.
And that there was one founder who used the pen name, the kind of secret, whatever name, kind of professional name, Hermes Trismegistus.
Yes.
And it probably wasn't Hermes Trismegistus, the actual guy, but it was someone working under that name. And then you went on to figure out who that was.
I am saying that we would identify this legendary Hermes with Eudoxus of Cnidos.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, because I've been pondering this for 10 years, it makes sense to me. To someone who is more schooled in, like, either New Age theories that the Atlanteans brought it all over, Barbara Hand Clow tells us the Atlanteans, and Alice Bailey says it's the Atlanteans and so forth. A lot of people get the credit, but Eudoxus was a mathematician and astronomer.
Yes.
Seemingly smart guy.
He was incredibly famous in his day. He was a mathematician and an astronomer. He wrote a book on geography. He traveled all over the Mediterranean area. He was familiar or was associated with the Platonic Academy, so certainly knew Plato, Aristotle, all that gang.
So he's that's amazing that he was alive in that era, in those circles.
Yes.
He knew Plato and Aristotle.
He would have been, according to recent scholarship, he was born around 390 BC, and that would make him about 38 years younger than Plato and 7 or 8 years older than Aristotle.
I'm sorry, I missed how many years younger than Plato?
He would have been about 38 years younger than Plato,
right, and
about 7 or 8 years older than Aristotle. And he spent time at the Platonic Academy on at least one occasion, probably more than one, according to an account by Proclus about the mathematical work that was going on at the Platonic Academy. Eudoxus was one of a number of people who were developing geometry in Athens under the sort of general direction of Plato. So he was not an obscure figure by any means.
Yeah.
He was very, very distinguished, very famous in his day, probably in his day more famous than Aristotle. And so we're not talking about some minor figure here. We're talking about somebody who was right in the middle of the classical period, knew all the people who were the significant people of the time, and was right in the middle of all of the intellectual activity that was going on at that period. So he's, if our claim is right, it means that the astrology was actually introduced by a man of that caliber.
Yes. And to them, what was astrology? What did Eudoxus, as far as you can tell, what did he think he was doing?
I think that the way to put it, and this might help make people understand a little bit why someone like Eudoxus could be considered to be the founder. What everyone was doing in that period, this is Plato, Aristotle, and all their contemporaries, is they were interested in cosmology. And cosmology for the Greeks, and particularly anyone that was a member of the Pythagorean school, and Diogenes Laertius, who writes a little short biographical sketch of Eudoxus, considers him to be the last of the original Pythagoreans. For the Pythagoreans, cosmology was, the study of cosmology was to understand the cosmos as a well-ordered, well-arranged whole. That's sort of their little formula. Now, Eudoxus almost certainly, excuse me, almost certainly had his own, just one second here, almost certainly had his own cosmological speculations, and so someone who was interested in understanding the cosmos in such a manner could in fact be interested in ways in which the planet realm was associated with the realm of the signs and so forth. And I'm saying that the astrological concepts as we now know them originally have a cosmological import initially. Now, one of the persons who had a huge impact on Greek cosmology was a man named Anaxagoras. He was about the age of Socrates. And Anaxagoras had a view, or introduced the idea, that the cosmos was ordered by a divine intelligence. In Greek, this would be nous. So there was a divine...
Nous, the word nous, N-O-O-S, as in noosphere.
No, N-O-U-S. Okay, this is the Greek word for mind. We get the word noetic, for instance, from nous. It's a general word for mind.
What about Teilhard de Chardin's idea of the noosphere?
Of the... I didn't hear that.
The sphere of all intelligence and all data. It may be related.
I don't know.
Yep. Okay. So they have this concept of the nous. This is Anaxagoras. Anaxagoras. Yes,
and the famous statement by Anaxagoras is that the nous, or the divine intelligence, orders what has been, what is, and what will be. So everything is orderly in the cosmos. So someone might say, well, gee, if I could only second-guess the cosmic mind, I would know what has been, what is, and what will be. So through that type of cosmological speculation, you could see that something like astrology as a prognostic could also have developed out of such cosmological thinking. So what I would say is that Eudoxus developed a cosmology with predictive or prognostic potential. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so on one level, they were interested in working with a linear model of time and wanted to know what was happening.
Yeah, surely. I mean, we all do, don't we? I mean, but this would provide some kind of rational approach to actually having a prognostic or an astrology in the modern sense of the word. It would give some justification or motivation for even trying to develop such a thing, rather than just have, okay, well, there's some magic practice here, we're going to look at the sky and whatnot. One thing I should say is that to assert that astrology began as a cosmology is very different than what evidently was happening in Babylonia before Eudoxus's day and also concurrent with his own lifetime,
right,
where you have the priesthood making observations over a long period of time and then writing down what happened when the planets were in different positions. So they had their own empirical correlations that have been assembled over millennia, actually. Now, what I'm talking about is an astrology that has a different motivation. It's not based on that type of empiricism, simply correlating celestial events with human events over a long period of time. What I'm talking about is an astrology that comes out of a cosmology which is highly rational. In other words, there are assumptions being made about the cosmos itself, and the astrology grows out of those assumptions, right, prior to any testing or correlation of human events with celestial events or anything of that kind.
Right.
So I would say that Western astrology, insofar as it derives from someone like Eudoxus, is in fact a highly rational, highly systematic construct. Now, some people are going to say that means Eudoxus made it up. And to some extent, I'm saying that that's true. But if, in fact, he had a true cosmology, then that would provide for the possibility of a valid astrology.
Yes, and this is in some ways typically Greek, in that it's
entirely Greek. Yes.
Yeah, in terms, it's recognizably so in terms of it being a super duper left brain.
Yes.
This is not any kind of intuitive thing like the Babylonians are doing.
No, well, theirs isn't intuitive. The Babylonian is almost entirely observational.
But it's environmental. Yes. They're looking at their environment and tuning into their environment, which is, I guess, intuitive is not the right word for that. This stands apart from the environment.
Yes, this originates in cosmological speculation, and so I'm saying that concepts like the planetary sect, this very characteristic division of the 7 classical planets into 2 groups, which does not have any apparent astronomical justification.
You mean day and night planets?
Day and night planets. So Mars, Venus, and the Moon are nocturnal planets, and Saturn, Jupiter, and the Sun are diurnal planets. Yeah. And they are 2 sects, like political factions, religious sects. Mm-hmm. That's what the Greek word means. So there are these 2 camps of planets, and they have very different, as sects, they espouse, you might say, very different principles. And those principles divide the sects into the 2 camps that the planets belong in. Now, I maintain that this particular classification of the planets stems directly from cosmological considerations. It isn't even immediately justifiable astronomically. It isn't an order, a planetary order or planetary grouping that you could immediately infer just by studying the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
And another claim of mine is that the association of the four physical elements with the what modern people would call the triplicities, in other words, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius are fire-like signs,
mm-hmm.
Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, Earth-like signs, that those designations, those associations of the triplicities with the four physical elements also directly come out of Eudoxus's work. So it is concepts of those kind are not in any way derived from experience. They are highly rational concepts that come and derive ultimately from a cosmology that I say Eudoxus himself was responsible for. So the other thing that goes along with this, excuse me just a minute, Eric.
Go ahead. No, please do.
Mike. The reason that I started thinking in this direction about a founder or the way I used to put it, one man or a small group of men working according to a common program, the reason that I began to search, you might say, for the founder or founders is because Greek astrology, Hellenistic astrology, is highly systematic. The concepts don't just stand in isolation from one another. They're all tied together in this very, very intimate way. Now, there are people who deny that this is the case, but they simply don't know what I know. I've been convinced of this for many, many years, and particularly over the past several years, I've confirmed this to an extent that I could hardly have imagined even when I began to get the idea. So my reasoning was very simple. If you have something that is this systematic, a system of astrological concepts that are so tightly integrated, it must have been the result, the introduction, the development of the astrology must have been the work of one man or a group of men working according to a common program. Mm-hmm. How could it have become that systematic if that were not the case? So I've been singing that particular song for many, many years. Now I feel like I've finally found the founder.
So what can you say about? And I recognize that you're not going to reveal all of your clues, but what can you tell us that would support the idea? This cogency of the system. That is
that's one
good clue. I mean,
that is a clue. Yeah. But I can also say, and because I said this much in the announcement that we put out, Eudoxus was the man who first assigned the planetary or the names of the 12 signs, gave them the Greek names.
Yep.
Now, there may have been some assignments that had been made prior to Eudoxus's day, and if they are in the system of names, it just means he accepted them. But there are several conspicuous examples of names of the signs which bear no resemblance whatsoever to their Babylonian counterparts, such as Pisces for the Babylonians is the swallow's tail or tails. They don't know for sure whether it was plural, where in Greek it's the fishes, Pisces. And then you have Aries, which for the Babylonians is something like the hired hand or the hireling or something like that. But in Greek, it's the ram. Now, I'm saying that those names were first assigned, or at least accepted or approved, by Eudoxus. And there's general scholarly consensus about this. This isn't anything I'm making up. If you look in a Greek lexicon for the Greek names for the signs, you will find that the earliest references to those names are, in fact, found in a commentary by Hipparchus, where he has verbatim quotations of statements made by Eudoxus in a lost work called The Phenomena. So the earliest names for the signs are in fact found in this work of Hipparchus, where he refers specifically to Eudoxus's the names that Eudoxus gave them. Mm-hmm. Now, if you study, and this is the thing I'm not going to go into detail in here, if you study the spellings in Greek of those names, you see implicit in the spellings, either individually or when the different names in their Greek form are compared with one another, you see, for instance, a structure emerging which is like that of the four elements and other such matters. So you could say that the evidence is to some extent in the names themselves, which I find kind of interesting, because it means as long as the names survived, there would be some hope of recovering a lot of this astrological doctrine. So that is largely the approach that my wife and I have been following for a number of years now, and it has been very fruitful. So I am writing this material up. I actually have written most of it up, and I'm trying to put it together here in book form, and I hope it will be out fairly shortly. And then, the storm will begin. How that doesn't prove anything, that kind of thing, and which I'm expecting will happen. But I actually have quite a lot of proof beyond what I just alluded to, and so I will not be able to put one publication out that outlines all of my arguments. I'm going to have to do this in a sequence of monographs, and that's what I intend to do in the near future. So, and there are mathematical arguments and other arguments. So I'm sorry to be so reticent about it, but it's something I have to be. I have to be careful about what I say and how I say it until I can actually publish the material.
Yeah, I get it. And I mean, it's not like it's an implausible theory on its face. It's certainly more plausible than some ship came from Atlantis.
Well, it's more plausible to me.
And look, I mean, nothing against the Atlanteans or anything.
Right.
So they have their own problems, right? So just to sum up, there is observation going on by the Chaldeans. Mm-hmm. In what's called Babylon. That's the Tigris and Euphrates Valley. That's where that's going on.
That's right.
Okay, mm-hmm. So they're not dumbasses. They're looking up, and they want to know too what's going on.
Right.
And in parallel, of course, this has been going on for a long time. So the Greeks somehow found out about this.
Yeah, that's right.
And like the Greeks do, they wanted to put things in order.
Yes. Or as is said in Plato's Epinomis, sure, we Greeks get things from other cultures, we just make them better.
Right.
You take that for whatever it is, but it was a Greek attitude. So there were obviously some other indigenous astrologies going on, concurrent with with the classical period in Greece. But they are not rational, highly rational, cosmological astrologies, as far as I can tell, or as far as anybody has said,
Yes.
at least up to this point. So there's a striking difference right at that point. Now, one of the difficulties that I had was there is a striking statement by Cicero in his treatise on divination, where he says that Eudoxus rejected the Chaldean ways, or gave no credence to the Chaldean ways of trying to predict a man's life from his birth date.
Yeah.
Now, historian of mathematics Thomas Heath takes this as a statement, as he put it, that Eudoxus was a true man of science and wouldn't have anything to do with superstitious nonsense like astrology. So this very, very striking statement by Cicero. On the other hand, there is a statement that was actually found by one of my students, dug out, who was researching Zoroastrianism. There is a statement in the Roman work of the Roman naturalist Pliny that Eudoxus considered the magic art to be superior to all other arts. So here we have now, this is in the context of Persian magic, which includes three disciplines. One of them is medicine, the other is religion, and the third is astrology.
When is this in the timeline? When is Persian magic developed in comparison to the founding era?
It would have been. This is a statement attributed to Eudoxus. Eudoxus was born on the island of Cnidos, which is sort of on the shores of Asia Minor, close to what today would be Turkey. But he traveled everywhere. He obviously traveled to Persia, and the priests or the magi had a practice, and it involved some form of astrology. And Eudoxus was clearly aware of this, and this would have been a practice going on earlier than Eudoxus's time. And so Eudoxus evidently approved of what they were doing. So the way to reconcile these two statements would be, Eudoxus rejected Babylonian astrology. He didn't reject astrology.
Yeah.
Babylonian astrology, which could mean simply that he rejected an astrology that was based entirely on empirical correlations. But it does not rule out the possibility that he, in fact, through his cosmological speculations, was trying to develop an astrology, and that's my claim.
Yeah, and so he's going. He wants to go from kind of the theory forward, in a sense.
Yeah, he wants everything to be on the firmest, give it the firmest grounding possible, which he would see as coming out of a cosmology.
Yep.
And by the way, as an astronomer, Eudoxus was the first person to give an account of the irregular motions of the planets through a geometrical model called the theory of the concentric spheres. So he would have each planet being placed simultaneously on several spheres that were moving in different ways, and that would account for the aberrant motions of the planets and phenomena like retrogradation. So he was the first man in history to ever do that. So, and by the way, the other thing that Diogenes Laertius tells us is that Eudoxus gave lectures on the cosmos. I'm saying he certainly would have been interested in cosmology, on the gods, and on the celestial phenomena. So, I mean, we know that Eudoxus was active in those directions.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So far this makes sense to me. It aligns with everything we've talked about previously. But one thing I didn't mention, by the way, is that there's a lot of different versions of quote unquote classical astrology going around. You have stuck with Greek astrology all through.
Yes.
It seems like about a 25-year, how long, research phase?
Well, we started Project Hindsight in 1993,
Yep.
and I was doing the Greek translations and editing some of the Latin ones, at least not initially, but a little bit later. But I've always thought that the way of trying to understand something is to go back to the beginnings. Favorite quote of mine is that great ideas have great beginnings, by Heidegger. I've used that on a number of occasions. And so it's also just part of my training to go back to the sources, and try to read the original source texts and then try to understand the development of some discipline prospectively rather than retrospectively, which might seem paradoxical given the fact that the project was called Hindsight. But anyway...
it sounds like you're dealing with formal cause here.
Well, I should say part of the reason that I make some of the kind of pronouncements, I guess some people would think of them as that, about Greek astrology or Hellenistic astrology as opposed to later developments is that I'm sort of in a unique position because I didn't come to astrology having learned modern astrology. I learned astrology by translating Greek texts. So I tend to see all later developments in Western astrology through the lens of Greek astrology, whereas other people are trying to see Greek astrology as the antecedent or something to modern developments. So, I have almost entirely devoted almost all my efforts to the Greek material.
Yep.
There are interesting things in the medieval tradition, and of course the medieval astrologers were heavily dependent on the Greek sources. But it's always seemed to me, why read derivative things when you have access to to some level at least, have access to the original sources.
Yeah, and that was the whole purpose of Project Hindsight. I mean,
that's right.
There was not. I mean, we take for granted the fact now that there's translations of things. There were not good translations prior to Project Hindsight. Even William Lilly worked with mistranslations of Ptolemy.
Yeah. Well, my translations were not perfect when I started them either. Nobody had ever really encountered anything like this. I mean, Ptolemy's, Tetrabiblos had been translated, and Manilius's his work had been translated. But right from the outset, we were discovering material that was almost entirely unknown, just kind of unheard of. Distinctions, for instance, the whole sign places or whole sign houses, which we can come back to if you like, and all kinds of timing procedures, the Western equivalents to the Hindu dashas, all kinds of things that we found. But it was so difficult to get under control because it seemed to be headed in all kinds of different directions. There didn't seem to be any real consistency, and in particular, you couldn't find any explicit statements about cosmology or theoretical underpinnings or anything. They seemed to be almost entirely just practical manuals for how to do astrology. So it was perplexing But there was enough there, even from the beginning, to give me some sense that underneath all of this was something coherent. And I had to find a way of accessing that level in these treatises that appeared to be simple, practical manuals for the practice of astrology. So then, over the years, I began to notice things, that there were certain compositional devices, in Greek compositional devices, that seemed to be used quite frequently, and they would be puzzling. You would have, two like parallel constructions, but they weren't quite parallel. They're obviously set up to be parallel, but they're not just repeating identically what the one phrase, for instance, would be saying. And so I started pushing on those, and I realized that this was, in fact, a form of encryption. And encryption isn't quite the right word. It was the early texts, not all of the later commentaries in Greek, but the earliest source texts have this very strange, this unique signature composed in a very special way that is intended, that they're composed in such a way that the careful reader, or the one who's willing to spend enough time with the text, will in fact snag on things. Inconsistencies, sometimes things that look like they're downright contradictions, other just peculiarities, and excuse me, I've still got some problem here in my chest. So I slowly began to realize that these compositional devices were intentional, and the material is actually being presented to you almost like a puzzle, and you have to puzzle it out, and then you understand what the author is saying. And these devices would serve to seal the material off from people who were just hobbyists or something, who would just kind of glance at it. But it would preserve the original doctrine in a very compact form for anyone who, first of all, got wind of the compositional devices, and secondly, took the time to decode them. And that, of course, is very time-consuming, but it's always rewarding. So you'll have some treatise that comes down under the name, for instance, of Hermes Trismegistus, or one of the other legendary founders. And these treatises are all, for the most part, very, very short. There might be collections, large collections of these very short treatises, but they can be sometimes, 2 paragraphs. And the doctrine is being communicated through those very short and early texts. Now, astrologers like Vettius Valens in the 2nd century of the Christian era openly complain about the obscurity of the texts that were the source texts of their day. So we're not dealing with people who are writing in a modern essay style here. This is a very special kind of writing. It's taken me 23 years to open it up, and to some extent, I'm sure there are, mysteries here that I haven't seen and maybe never will. But one of the terrible mistakes that people are making when they review these texts, when they try to study them, is that to read them as though the author was writing on a blog or something. No, I mean, seriously. I mean, well, here, that's the way we write.
Yeah.
Well, this is the way they wrote. Now, but anybody who has really studied Greek writing, Greek texts, philosophical texts, other kinds of texts, realize that the Greeks seldom write like that. I mean, Plato wrote dialogues,
this is a distinction from the Greek writing of its day. The other contemporary writing is different.
Yeah, it's completely. One way of doing this is that, or thinking about this, is what did Plato do? He wrote dialogues,
which are designed to explicate. They're designed to bring out something in a way the mind is accustomed to.
And in a more conversational way, but at the same time, the dialogues are so carefully constructed that when you go back over them, then you see, gee, I wonder why Socrates asked the question in exactly that manner. Mm-hmm. And so the dialogues are designed to make you think about the subject that's being discussed, not to simply be informed by a doctrine. Okay, I mean, what we do, we go to school, we have a teacher, teaches us, automobile repair or advanced physics. We get information that we can then apply somewhere. That is not the Greek ideal of teaching. So Plato wrote dialogues. But Plato was concerned about what he would call the tyranny of the written word. You have to remember that it was sort of within Plato's memory, or shortly before Plato's own time, that people actually started writing books.
Yeah.
Writing books. And there were teachers, but then all of a sudden people are writing books. So, this is a phenomenon in Plato's day. Books are being written. Plato stands back and looks at this. Is this a good idea?
Yes.
To have written books.
Yeah.
So he wants to write in such a manner as to avoid the tyranny of the written word by using devices from like ordinary conversational discourse, but using them in a very clever manner to get the reader or the student to actually think something through himself, rather than simply be spoon-fed and told what the case is. Mm-hmm. So, I have this issue all the time with Project Hindsight, because I'm dealing with these difficult texts, and I have a course. I'm teaching Greek astrology, but the tendency in the astrological world is, just give me the techniques, right? How many times have you heard that? But I feel, because I had this experience in reading these texts, I had to decode them. I learned something that I would not have learned or understood if the material had been simply presented to me in essay form.
Yep.
Now, if I'm a responsible teacher, I have to somehow recreate that experience for my students. I can't just, here it is. Here's what you do. Now you do this, and you apply that, and you do this timing thing, and you get X result. The difficulty is that I think that this Greek astrology has enormous potential. It's not easy. And puzzling through the texts, why should one bother to go, why should anyone have to go through the agonizing process of decoding, decrypting? Why can't they just have the results? Well, it is my view that these cryptic devices are there. You have to go through all these hoops, because when you're doing that, you are getting training. Your mind is being trained in such a manner that you will need when you actually try to read charts.
Yeah.
You remember, you're old enough to remember the wax on, wax off episode, and you know what I mean? Uh-huh. This is the wax on, wax off part. You don't know that you're being taught astrology when you read these things. You're just getting a headache from trying to read something.
Yep.
So So I find that actually a very elegant way of teaching. I mean, the way I was taught by reading the text, and to some extent, or as much as possible, I have to recreate that experience for people I'm teaching, instead of just giving them the techniques.
So how do you do that? What's an idea of how you do that?
Well, I'm not requiring people to go through and read the Greek text, although I'd be happy to, if I do have one student who loves doing this kind of thing as much as I do. But in the course that I present, it's not easy. It's not that I'm making it difficult for the simple purpose of being difficult. I have to present material in a certain order, not always put it the way people would expect it. The course is in audio, so I have people by now sort of broken in, and they pride themselves. Well, I listened to that section 5 times, and I think I still have to go back over it again.
Yeah.
So they're getting a different kind of training than the simple formal instruction on how to read a chart. And most of them seem to respond to it fairly well. I may, occasionally go overboard, and I think I have maybe lost a few people along the line, but I do not feel it is responsible to teach this material in any other way. And I'm still trying to perfect the other devices that I can use when I am presenting it.
Yep.
So anyway, this is my own view. I'm not necessarily recommending it to anybody else, but this is what I think is a responsible way to teach the material, particularly this Greek material, because you also have to. I teach a lot of philosophy along with this because you have to. You have to be able to see. You have to be able to see the astrology through the eyes of a Greek. I mean, it's not just separable from the metaphysical presuppositions that guided the development of the astrology in the first place.
Yep.
You have, so you know me well enough that any opportunity to talk about metaphysics, right?
And it's based on a worldview, you're saying, and that worldview needs to be understood as part of understanding the astrology. I mean, one of the biggest critiques I have of people who are kind of bandying about with classical astrology and making declarative statements about people's lives in the 21st century based on, 2nd century or whatever doctrines, is that the worldview is so radically different.
Yes.
Science has changed so much.
Yes.
There have been legitimate discoveries of science since Eudoxus and mathematics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Quantum is a real thing. Relativity is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And these, though they are somewhat transparent, feed our worldview.
Yes, they do.
And so we are kind of living in the polyverse.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
And we know that space and time are not absolute, even if we've never read special relativity. Einstein's discoveries impact our lives.
Yes, they do.
And so we are taking all of this in the much wider field context of our lives that we live, and I think that has to be done gently. I think it has to be done consciously, with the perils acknowledged. You
mean in trying to apply traditional astrological interpretation to the modern world?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. We have.
Okay.
And what I say, go ahead. That you have options, or your clients have options that people didn't have.
Yes.
In that day.
Yes.
That our lives are much less predictated.
Yes.
Than 2,500 years ago.
Certainly. Mm-hmm.
And we have psychology. We have the ability to understand motives. We have other ways to get answers to questions that did not exist in the 4th century BC.
Right.
And all of those differences need to be taken into account before we make a pronouncement about someone's Mars in fall and how bad their life is going to be because they've got Mars in fall.
I would never. I understand what you're saying.
Things
for
I,
sure.
I want to. These things raise revolution in my heart when I hear the things that have been said to people based on some misunderstood pronouncement from some ancient rule.
Remember, I said that that these texts were written in such a way as to make you think through something.
Mm-hmm. That part's important.
the objection that I have to I'll just be frank to what other traditional astrologers are doing is they have not penetrated to the level of the principles. They will be when they offer a delineation, for instance, it will be based ultimately or prompted by some astrological cookbook of early times, because there are such. Well, let's look at Saturn configured with the Sun, Saturn configured with Jupiter. Run down the list. It means such and such, and means such and such. Okay, now if you just consult one of those delineation texts, you're going to get results that will have that would not be valid in a person's life, not simply because times have changed, but because those delineations, those source texts, were never meant to be used that way. They look like they're modern cookbooks, but they were never meant to be used that way. I maintain that despite all the changes that have occurred in the modern world, that if you understand the principles behind this original astrology of the West, it will still have applicability. Now, I cannot say with complete assurance that this astrology works across the board. Nobody can say that.
Yeah.
Okay. I do have one thing that gave me quite a bit of confidence was this work that I did on one of the timing procedures in the Greek material,
releasing,
which was zodiacal releasing. Yeah. Now, I spent a lot of time with that, and I realized that I never had a failure with it. Now, what do I mean by that? I wasn't telling people that they were going to get fired from their job the next week, or I never made statements like that. But what I did see is the use of that technique, word that I don't like much anymore, the word technique, by the way. But anyway, that if you look at it from the point of view of how you see a structure to your life, almost like it's an astrological biography, if you use it for that purpose, it doesn't fail, which was interesting to me. The only failure I ever had with it was a woman who was lying about her birth time and the events in her life. And the chart didn't make any sense. No, seriously. It didn't make any sense at all. But there are charts that are harder and charts that are easier, but the structure can be seen. But what I was doing there is something quite different than just doing a fresh reading of a chart. I was trying to apply the very same timing procedure to the entirety of one person's life. In other words, from birth up to wherever they were when they came to see me. And my statement, and I told everyone whose chart I ever read, and I do it to this day, I have no business trying to take a peek into what might be forthcoming in your life if I can't make sense of your life up to this point. In other words, using the same technique. I have no business. It would be unethical, really. But the realities of astrological readings and all, I've got an hour to spend on this chart. To me that's ridiculous.
Well, Diana Stone, you're the only the second astrologer I've ever heard say that. Diana Stone was the first. I walked into one of her lectures at a conference, and she said, I caught just as she was saying, if you have 1 hour with the client and you have to take 55 minutes to figure out what the heck is going on with them, and then you do the reading in 5 minutes. You take that 55 minutes and figure out what's going on with them.
Yeah.
And I developed a technique using Chiron transits, where if I have someone coming in, I know they've got a complex situation, I can spot check a little, because I've got a lot of practice now. I know where to look, and maybe check 3 or 4 Chiron events that look really intense, and hear from them how their chart responds when you turn up the juice.
Yeah.
And this is just a way to orient on the person's story arc, on their trajectory, to see, what they're likely to do under similar stressful situations. So that is, I think. Thank you for using this highly responsible approach. With the depth that you have an understanding of these techniques. I would love to learn the zodiacal releasing thing just for the fun of it.
It's a wonderful thing. It's a crazy looking thing. It uses a 360-day year, and all kinds of other peculiarities.
Yep.
But I've read quite a few charts with it. Some I have in fact gotten paid for a few of them, but I've read for friends. But also lots of celebrity charts or outstanding individuals, and I was astonished at how well it works, but it's a huge amount of work. When if I'm going to read someone's chart, I don't have much time to do this really, but when I do, I get a biographical sketch from them. Okay, and they have to provide this, to me, and it can take me, the first day, I get the biographical stuff. I look. I've got the chart. I've got the time periods, printed out in front of me, and I look at the chart, and I look at this, and I just see a blur. Then maybe the next day, then I start, then I can also start asking the person some questions, material that they didn't provide. Oftentimes, important events in their life that they've frankly just forgotten. It happens all the time, and then so I actually am like crafting a kind of biography for these people. And if I can't do that, then I'm not going to say anything about what's forthcoming. But this can take days worth of work.
Yes.
Okay. Now, which means, I can't do this for, whatever the going rate, is for reading a chart. So that's the downside of this. On the other hand, I believe that through this process, I get real results.
Yep.
Real results. But it takes time.
And there may be ways to, I don't want to say shortcuts, but like holographic methods of using core principles from this that sum it up.
Say what you mean by that again?
Well, I'm saying, let's say you're able to identify several of the core principles operating within the zodiacal releasing method. You may be able to do a kind of you may be able to make it more succinct. It may be another level of refinement. Like all technologies can go through refinements.
Sure.
They still work just fine. New transistors work just as well as the old ones did, if not far better.
Yeah.
So while we're on, a couple of more. Can I bring up a different topic?
Sure.
Thema Mundi. So this is where we started our conversation about this, and I love this thing, and it's so elegantly, deceptively simple. Is the Thema Mundi, do you think, the product of the mind of Eudoxus?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
I can't prove that, of course. The Thema Mundi in Firmicus Maternus, who's one of our source texts writing in Latin, explicitly says that the Thema Mundi was presented, you might say, to Necapso and Ptahsporus, two of these important, founding people, by Asclepius, who was had this doctrine transmitted to him by Hermes. So you have a lineage here.
Yep.
You've got Hermes Trismegistus, and then you have this Asclepius person, and then a person named Anubio, And they're sort of the founders. I see Asclepius and Anubio as probably direct students or successors of Hermes. They presented this material. They presented it, according to legend, to Nicepso and Ptosaurus, somewhere evidently in the 2nd century BC, or maybe even later. Now, everybody thinks of that just as some kind of that Nicepso and Ptosaurus would say something like that to give their own writing more authority by invoking some semi-divine source for it. And that's what modern people, cynical people, tend to think. I actually think that this may be a somewhat, perhaps, colorful record of an actual report of an actual event that took place.
Mm-hmm. I'm using pen names here. Asclepius is not the god of medicine.
Yeah,
it's a pen name.
It is.
It is that guy?
Yes. Greek god of...
Asclepius was a person, not a god.
Well, we have people who, Hermes is a god too. So you have these sort of theophoric names, which are fairly common in Greek, associated with these legendary founders. But there is a person. Let's say this: one of the founders is called Asclepius. That's his name.
Yeah.
It could be a nom de plume.
Could be his mother named him. His mother called him Asclepia because she liked doctors.
It could be that. Could be anything like that. And we may never know.
You're gonna be a doctor.
But as the legend has it, then, as what we have in Firmicus Maternus, is Hermes transmits this doctrine, which involves the Thema Mundi, to Asclepius, who then revealed it, so to speak, to Nicepso and Ptosaurus, who then published it.
Yeah.
The Latin verb there is edo, which we get the word edit from it, just to give out.
Mm-hmm.
So so that is an account of where the Thema Mundi came from.
It's passed along and finally published.
That's
and it's
right.
published in this era of where the mystery school, as I call it, is revealed in the 2nd century BC.
That's right.
We should mention what this Thema Mundi thing is, right?
Yes.
It's a chart. It's an astrological figure.
Yes.
And in the Eudoxus version, Cancer is in the ascendant, 15 degrees.
Yes.
And the moon is in the 1st house.
What are you calling house?
Place, I guess. Well, the moon.
No, I don't mean the term. You have a Cancer rising with the moon at 15 degrees on the ascendant of that chart.
The moon is at 15. So the moon and the ascendant are considered to be at 15 degrees.
Yes.
Okay. So
and then the other planets are in their domiciles. So the sun is in Leo at 15 degrees, and then Mercury in Virgo at 15 degrees, and so forth.
And this takes us around to let's see. Let's go through them. Second place is Sun and Leo at 15. Third place Mercury, Virgo. Fourth place Venus, Libra. Fifth place, Mars, Scorpio, followed by sixth, which is Sag and Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
Where's Saturn in this?
Saturn in Capricorn.
It's in the 7th?
In the 7th.
Hold on, let me get
and then we start moving backwards, because we also have, not in one chart, but we're told that Aquarius is also belongs to Saturn.
Yep.
And then we go backwards: Pisces to Jupiter, Mars, Aries, and so forth.
Yeah, and so one of the cool things about this is that it organizes the cosmos with the moon and the sun associated with Cancer and Leo, and exactly opposite them are two Saturn-oriented
That's right.
signs, and then it spreads out Jupiter, Jupiter, Mars, Mars, Venus, Venus, Mercury, Mercury, and then
Right.
the Moon and the Sun. So it's this lovely symmetrical device.
Yes, and another way of putting it is the domiciles of the two lights are opposite the two domiciles of Saturn. The domiciles of Venus are opposite the domiciles of Mars.
Yep.
The domiciles of Jupiter are opposite the domiciles of Mercury.
Yep.
So there is striking symmetry in this, and so there is just a simple bit of doctrine, of lore, in that thema mundi, in the assignment of planets to their respective signs that in Greek are called their domiciles.
Yes. It's a perfectly elegant, seemingly simple mandala.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, okay, so this device is, first of all, thema mundi. What does that actually mean?
It means a thema is like something put or placed. It's actually thema mundi is a Latin. It would just mean chart of the world.
Yes.
Like mundus mundi.
So it doesn't actually mean that the world was born and
No.
these things were there. I've understood this as being more of a teaching device, an
That-
allegorical teaching
yes.
device,
Yeah.
and a summation. It's kind of the super simplified table of essential dignities, which would seem to follow from this.
Many things do follow. But you're right to say that it sort of encapsulates or sums up a lot of lore. And at some point, I'm going to actually write a monograph. There are a lot of really subtle things connected in the thema mundi. I'll just give you one. In Greek astrology, there are groupings of successive signs or successive houses, but it is different than the way modern astrologers do this sort of after Rudyard. So, for instance, I'll try to translate this into modern jargon. One grouping with the signs is what modern people call the mutable sign, the next cardinal sign, and then the fixed sign.
Yep.
Okay. Now, Greeks have different words for them, and in fact, these modern terms are not good terms at all, in my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. So those three signs are a group. It's not the cardinal sign, the fixed sign, and the following mutable, okay, like we get from Rudyard and other people. In other words, there is a kind of unitary character about the cardinal sign and the two flanking signs, one of which is fixed and the other one is mutable.
Yep.
Okay, so you have four of these quadrants,
right,
in a given chart. All right, now there is something similar in the houses, which I normally just call places.
Yep.
Where you have what modern people would call the cadent place, and then you have the angle, so to speak, and then you have the succeeding sign.
So that'd be, for example,
like
we're
9,
talking
10,
about-
and 11.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
we're talking about, so if we do 9, 10, and 11, that's the ninth house is the succeedant, and the 10th is the angular because it's
No,
about
the ninth is
sorry,
cadent.
cadent. I
Yeah,
apologize.
yeah.
Followed by succeedant, followed by cadent, Taurus, for example. And that little group is up on the top of the thema mundi, Pisces, Aries,
That's right.
Taurus.
You've got it. In other words, a grouping, I call these angular triads for reasons of my own, okay, a grouping that is indigenous to the realm of the places or the houses is superimposed on a grouping that is indigenous to the signs. In the thema mundi, they're lined up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I figured this
go ahead.
out from using the thema mundi. Okay, good. So another thing about the thema mundi is what I call the 90-degree shift.
Yeah.
that typically we think of Aries as being the first house and Taurus as being the second, and so forth. Once you start looking at the Thema Mundi for a while, you realize, well, these people put Cancer on the first house.
Yes.
And so that shifts everything 90 degrees. And
that's right.
From the way that we're taught from the Zip, Dobbins, Dane Rudyard approach.
Yeah, that approach has absolutely no historical precedent, and of course that's important to me. Okay, I mean,
yes, and it's important to know that.
Even if it's made up in the 20th century, because a lot of people don't know that. I mean, a lot of people really still think that, like, Greek astrology is somehow similar to modern astrology, and that modern astrology inherited most of its concepts from earlier astrology, which is to some extent true, except there's a whole lot that's just made up in the 20th century. I mean, there isn't any other way of describing it, and that this is one of them.
Yes.
And I also do not care for that alignment for other reasons, which, Aries equals first house equals Mars. I mean, there are differences between the places and the signs and the planets. The signs in Greek astrology do not have topics associated with them, the way planets signify things, and there are no topics.
Signify things. And houses
also signify things.
Yeah.
But to say this is to assume, say, that Aries has a Mars-like character, or that what you can say about Mars you can also say about Aries, and that in my opinion was a disaster for modern astrology. I must say, I need to qualify that remark. I mean, I'm going to start, being opinionated here, which I won't be able to help. But the modern astrologers don't think the way ancient astrologers did, because what they do is they think of something that kind of makes sense to them, and then they try it out. And then if it works a couple of times, it becomes a technique that they regularly use. And unfortunately, this is what happens so much in modern astrology, that people anachronistically suppose that that's how the astrology was developed in ancient times. Some Greek, with time on his hands, decides, well, gee, I'm going to connect these two planets with a line, and that looks kind of like the side of a square. Aha! This is a technique. I'm going to try it out in charts. That, as I said earlier, Greek astrology was just highly rational construct. Now, it was developed or made up. It was constructed, but it was constructed following some very, very sophisticated metaphysical principles, and there wasn't anything fuzzy about them.
Yep.
So, but all of these developments in modern astrology, I literally don't know what to say about them. Anyway,
I stubbed my toe. My
prejudice is yeah, right.
On the day the planet was discovered, I stubbed my toe, and therefore it must involve Pisces.
There you go.
I've actually read that from.
Yeah, you have. Okay.
I have read that. I would be embarrassed to have made that up myself. Now, the groupings of one of the ways I think about the signs, because I do a lot of this whole sign work, doing public astrology, as I call it, doing these readings, is that I think of one sign as really being revealed in that sign and the previous one and the next one as a little group.
Yeah.
So I figured out that grouping thing where you would look at Gemini, Cancer, and Leo as one cluster of concepts, basically.
Yeah.
That harmonize. But the most interesting thing about the Thema Mundi, the 90-degree shift, as I call it, is it takes us out of an identification with the human being, or the Earth even, as Aries rising, and it places all the properties, vibrational, energetic properties associated with the sign Cancer on the first house. Now, I may be applying some modern thinking here, but what to you is it saying that the sign Cancer is on the first house as opposed to the sign Aries?
okay, let me do some more pattern things first.
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm not sure that I can answer your question in the way I think you intended it. I'm not sure I can.
Yeah.
Okay, look at Cancer. You have Cancer. Imagine, visualize the exaltation signs.
Yes. Okay. So what are we looking for being exalted?
Okay, we
Cancer
have...
is not an exaltation. No, it is, isn't it?
Yes,
Jupiter.
it is.
Jupiter's
Jupiter.
exalted
Yeah.
in Cancer.
Right. So let's work backwards. Okay, we have the Moon exalted in Taurus. We have the Sun exalted in Aries. We have Venus exalted in Pisces. We have Mars exalted in Capricorn. We have Saturn exalted in Libra, and Mercury exalted in Virgo.
Rules and exalted. That's an interesting thing because it's both.
In the case of Mercury, yes. And there are reasons for that, but I think I could explain at some point. But now look at those. Look at each sign that is an exaltation sign, and look at its relationship to Cancer.
Okay, so it's Taurus is sextile, and Virgo is sextile.
Yes.
Cap is opposite.
Yep.
Pisces is trine. But Libra is square.
Libra is square, yeah, as is Aries.
Aries is the sun is exalted.
Exaltation of the sun. That's right.
Okay,
now,
so
all of those signs are connected to Cancer by the so-called classical aspects.
Yeah.
They're all configured, and by the way, the Greeks do not use other configurations like semi-sextiles.
I get it. No, those are much later.
Yeah.
So you're saying.
So you see that in the Thema Mundi itself, if you put the exaltations in there, you have all the exaltations configured, the signs configured with Cancer. That would not be true with Aries.
Yeah.
Okay, because Virgo, for instance, would be connected. And Pisces and Taurus would be adjacent to it, so it would not be connected. Now that's just a pattern, but there are so many patterns of this kind. These are things that are part of my evidence that this was a rational construct.
Yep. The joys the joys are another one of your patterns.
Yes,
right?
That's right. Yeah.
So how would that look?
Okay, you have Mercury has its joy in the first. Moon has its joy in the third. Venus has its joy in the fifth. Mars has its joy in the sixth. I'm doing joys. Yeah. Okay.
Saturn in the
12th. Pardon me?
Saturn
in the 12th. The Sun has its joy in the 9th, and Jupiter has its joy in the 11th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, we do not have all of those configured. Those are not configured to, they are not configured to Cancer, for instance, or to the first place in the same manner that the exaltation signs are.
Yep.
Okay? All right. They have their own rationale, however, because the two lights have their joys opposite one another, namely the 9th and the 3rd. The two benefics have their joys opposite one another. Mm-hmm. That's Jupiter in the 11th and Venus in the 5th, and the two malefics in the 12th and the 6th.
Yep. Okay,
so we have this very obvious, regular, deliberate pattern there, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, now, so we don't have the configuration to the rising sign, okay, the way we do
with the
exaltations.
Yep.
But if you look at the spatial distribution of the joys relative to the 3rd, which is the joy of the moon, you will see that there is exactly the same spatial distribution. In other words, all of the joys are configured to the third, in the same way that all the exaltations are configured to the first,
Right.
or to Cancer.
Yeah, I can see you look at this thing saying, "Gee, someone invented this."
It was, as I'm saying, and it had to have been, and there are, I would say, I have, over the years, discovered about, 15 to 25 patterns of this kind.
Really?
Okay, so, yeah.
Can you
I've got all
one more
kinds
that I can work on? Just one more.
Let's see. Let me think of one that I can...
Because I'm going to have my hands full studying the exaltations and the joys carefully, and then...
Yeah. I have quite a few that are going to be put in this monograph I'm writing. Why don't you just take those in for the moment?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I've good. That's enough, because I've done some sketches of this, and I've got a couple of marked up Themamundis, but I'll work with those. That's great. And now I've got this other idea of these joining signs being really important. One question I have is, what was the Greek name for the sign Cancer?
Karkinos. Like carcinoma?
Yep.
Okay, I mean, Karkinos is the name.
And
it means the crab. Can also mean pinchers, metaphorically.
And what was that about?
Pardon me?
You know, what was... Well, I'm kind of asking two questions at once, which is, what did the Greeks consider a sign to be? Is there even a word for sign in Greek?
Yes, there is. And you might remember, I used to have a T-shirt that we were selling, Project Hindsight T-shirts at one point, and I had one specially made for myself that had on the back the question in Greek, TSD Zoidion.
What's your
the
sign?
Greek word, yeah. And because that word Zoidion is a very strange word to use for what we call signs. And so it was kind of one of my signature themes for years to actually lecture on what that word might mean. And the root of the word is zoion, which is a word that means either an animal or a picture, like zoology. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's the root, the zoion. And what happens is it has a diminutive ending on it. So it becomes zoidion, and the idion is the diminutive ending. So I had all kinds of speculations over the years because the zoion root could mean either picture or animal or living thing. So I would riff on this in various ways. Now, the easiest thing that I could say is that a zoidion, developing the sense of image or representation with the diminutive ending, a zoidion / sign is a representative representation.
Yeah, it's like a menagerie. It's a picture of. It's like postcards of the zoo.
It's more than that. It's the crab. Okay, it is a representation of a terrestrial entity, but it is itself representative of a collection of characteristics. It is a water-like sign. It is a tropical sign, various other characteristics. So the sign itself, the zoidion, is a representation of something terrestrial, but for the purpose of representing the collection of characteristics that belong to that sign. And this is actually very, very subtle doctrine, and it's something I haven't finished my work on this. People, even people, particularly people doing traditional astrology, for the most part, have been ignoring the special characteristics that belong to the signs. This sign is said to be incomplete. This one is mutilated. This one's terrestrial. This is lascivious. You've got whole collections of characteristics.
Who gets to be lascivious?
There's several signs.
I hope one of them's Pisces.
I can't remember for certain. Right? Not Pisces.
Okay.
No, not Pisces. So these characteristics are part of the problem is you can't see. They're not regularly distributed like the four elements.
Yeah, sure. Right.
And there has to be a principle behind it. Some of them appear to be based on the characteristics of that terrestrial animal. Okay, some. Okay, like Pisces and Cancer are said to be prolific signs. Also, Scorpion, and because they have lots of offspring,
Right.
and so they're said to be prolific or abundant. So there are certain things, certain characteristics that do seem to derive directly from characteristics of the corresponding animal. But then there are other ones that are much subtler. Or even if they're derived from something that belongs to the animal, they actually are understood to represent something that you might not expect. So there are four-footed animals, okay, and Leo. But what does the word astrologically? What sense does four-footed have? I mean, you say you're not in some delineation that says, well, you're in Leo, so you're going to have trouble with with a four-footed animal. It's not that. It's four-footed represents stability.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I meant when I said that these that what we have here with the zodiac, with the signs, are representative representations.
Yeah, got it.
And that doctrine has to be recovered. And because almost all the texts say, you got to look at the characteristics of the signs, but nobody knows how to use them, and it's as a consequence, people just ignore them. When they do readings or when they lecture on the material and so forth. I'm not going to be happy until I understand that.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I've always thought was a little bit weird is when you read Lilly, he describes, the physical, things associated with Virgo, grain storage place and dairy and all. This sounds more appropriate to a house than to a sign, but by whatever 17th century, the two concepts are becoming interchangeable.
We're dealing with transformations that occurred, much later in the tradition. You would not find any of that in the Greek material. Part of the problem is a lot of stuff develops in later medieval astrology, coming out of mundane astrology, which is very poorly represented in the Greek material, and so. When you start looking at the whole Earth or something, then and you still want to use signs and things, you have to introduce other types of issues. And some of that stuff with dairy and all that kind of thing that you're saying, some of it might even have been, I don't know this for sure, this is just a wild guess, might have something to do with back formations of the lots. Because you've got all these specialized lots,
right.
Lists, and I don't know, they may have somehow gotten associated with certain signs for some reason. I am not an expert in that, and don't really have an opinion. But we should not blur the distinction between the places and the signs in that way, even when using whole sign places.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most useful, which is a whole other conversation. I don't think we need to go there. But like that, one of the first things a sign gives you is the planet associated with the sign. So if you've got the south node in the 7th house, what sign is that south node sitting in? That tells you what planet to look for information.
Yeah. Oh, certainly.
So first thing is just a reference that says, okay, this is sitting in the sign Cancer. We've got to look at the moon and assess the condition of the moon.
That's right.
To understand that.
Yeah, and that and the same thing with the place. I mean, if you want to study, you've got a planet in the fifth. You also need to take into account, the ruler of that sign, the domicile lord of that sign. So you're always getting led to a planet that has a special association with the sign.
Yes,
you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
I mean, modern astrologers don't do this just like as a matter of course, do they? I can't remember anymore. It's been so long. I haven't even talked to somebody doing modern astrology.
I don't think so.
Not as a matter of course.
A lot of them are interested in changing the way they work either. I think that's So a couple other things. One question I had was about music. What can you say about the development of music theory in parallel or succeeding the development of this astrological theory? Is there any relationship between the two that you can?
There is. One work. Well, I'll get to that in a second. Do you know much about Greek music theory?
A little bit. You mean the modes? You mean the modes?
It's more than that. It's the different scales. It is a very daunting subject.
Well, give me an example, because I studied music theory.
Highly mathematical.
You mean like the pentatonic scale, the Mixolydian scale?
No. I'm talking about what we would call. It's hard even to make the parallel. Here's okay. First of all, this work goes way back to Pythagoras. Okay, the development of the music scales.
Yeah, because he goes into, there's the famous scene where he goes into the luthier's shop and asks him to construct him a device.
Right.
Where he can measure the tail.
He's right. Scales. He's doing experiments with stretched strings. Noticing what sound is produced when you stop the string in the middle. And all that. Okay, now. This music theory continues to be developed through the Pythagorean school, up to through a man named Archytas of Tarentum, who lived in Italy. He was Greek, but lived in Italy. Archytas of Tarentum was roughly a contemporary with Plato. Mm-hmm. They knew each other, and for our purposes, what's important is Archytas of Tarentum was the teacher of Eudoxus in geometry and mathematics. Okay.
Archytas was the teacher.
He was the teacher of Eudoxus in geometry and evidently, which is I'm going to claim, music. Archytas was a music theorist. Introduced several different music structures that he called chromatic, diatonic, and mixed. Okay, so that terminology should begin to kind of, although the way it's used is somewhat different. Okay, so this is what the Greek musical theorists did, and they have enough surviving examples of written songs and things to know that this was also the musical practice of the day. Okay, this was the problem. You take an octave, and you first of all divide the octave into two perfect disjunct tetrachords.
Yep.
So this for us would be like C to F and G to upper C. All right, but these are perfect tetrachords. We're not doing any well-tempered system here. Okay, so you get two perfect tetrachords. Then the question is, how do you? When you do this, by the way, then you have for what would be our F and G, you have a perfect interval of 9/8. Okay, for the G to the F in the higher note in the lower tetrachord and the lower note in the higher tetrachord. Mm-hmm. That will give you a perfect 9 to 8 ratio. Now, you take each tetrachord from that point on. You have to do the same thing to both tetrachords, and you have to interpolate two notes in each of the tetrachords in a methodical manner, and that's where it gets to be really highly mathematical. All right.
When you interpolate, where do you land?
You have to do it. The ideal was that the intervals between successive notes, as much as possible, should be what are called super-particular ratios, which means something like 9/8, 4/3, 3/2, where the numerator is one greater than the denominator. Mm-hmm. That was their ideal. So you actually have intervals like 28 to 27, 15 to 14. You have all manner of such intervals. This was their ideal, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So you have all of the different ways in which you can interpolate these super-particular ratios within the extremities of the two tetrachords. This ends up giving you a great variety of different scale structures. Now, given one of those structures, the different modes, like the Lydian and Dorian and Phrygian and all that, are simply what note you begin with within one of those given scales.
Yeah,
okay?
They're all based on the Ionian scale. They're all just moving the Ionian scale steps around.
That's right. Okay, but by the time of Ptolemy, who wrote a work called the Harmonics, by the time of Ptolemy, there were about, how many of these were there? I counted them up. Altogether, I think about 15 or more such scale structures had been introduced mathematically. And maybe not quite that, but quite a few. So you would actually, what do we have? Major and minor, right? And then you have different keys. Well, they had like a dozen things corresponding to major and minor, and then in each one you would have the different keys. So the material is highly mathematical, quite elegant in my opinion, and then I think, strange, Archytas, who was developing this work, was the teacher of Eudoxus. Now, of course, it's not known whether Eudoxus himself had in fact done, no report is given that he worked on music theory, but that doesn't mean anything. Yeah. So I was reading, at one point, a text of Paul of Alexandria, which was the very first thing I ever translated. And the text was referring to that the trigon or the trine would have twice the power of this, and there were all these exact numerical statements being made that seemed completely crazy in an astrological text. I mean, like very, very precise numerical and this has the power of this, and this is greater than that. And I remember the very first time I translated that section, I'm wondering, what's going on here? This is an astrological text, isn't it? All right, so a couple of years ago, I wrote the precise numerical relationships out, all the ones that were stated, just in the text, in a short sequence of chapters. I wrote those exact mathematical relations down. There were 4 individual relationships, and there were 4 unknown things that I was trying to find. I had 4 equations, 4 unknowns. I just solved them simultaneously, and the numbers that popped out were the numbers corresponding to the original Pythagorean scale.
Which was what? The Ionian scale?
What it does, what it is, okay, first of all, you divide the octave into the 2 perfect tetrachords. So you have the ratio of the upper note, the F-like note, to the C is 4/3. Okay, so it's 4/3. Okay, then if you divided, so to speak, that ratio by 9/8, which is the central ratio, you get 32/27. If you divide it one more time, you get 256 over 243. All right. Those are the numbers that define the Pythagorean scale. So you would have, in terms of numbers, if you considered the fundamental to be 1, the next note above that would be 256 over 243. The one after that would be 32 over 27, and then the upper note in the tetrachord would be 4/3. So those would correspond to 4 notes in the tetrachord. Those numbers, those values that I gave you, I told you it's highly mathematical. Yeah. Those numbers themselves define the earliest known Pythagorean scale. Those very numbers. So right. I was just, I'm not even after anything musical. I'm simply wondering why there are all these overly precise statements, quantitative numerical statements being made in an astrological text, and I set them up and I couldn't believe what came out of that. Now this is a different type of encryption. All right, now you've heard about, the music of the spheres, right?
I've heard it.
Right? Okay, you've heard it, okay. All right, well, this is a Pythagorean view. I mean, it's a Pythagorean concept. Mm-hmm. That the cosmos is ordered and everything's moving around up there, and there is the music of the spheres. Now, this is way before the introduction or before Eudoxus comes along. So to answer your initial question, there was a highly developed music theory prior to Eudoxus's innovations in the astrology, but I am almost certain that he took them into account. First of all, just this wild thing that I discovered in the Paul text, where I see the Pythagorean scale, and then you start wondering about some of the other concepts, like the exaltations and the depressions. The Greeks don't call them fall. I don't know how that term ever ended up getting even into Latin. The Greek word is, the exaltations and their opposite signs are called their depressions.
Right.
In poetic texts, the exaltation will be the throne of a certain planet, and the depression will be a prison, in the poetic texts. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, numerous texts, Greek texts, will tell me that when a planet is in its own exaltation sign, there is an epitasis going on. Now, epitasis is a word that initially, originally has to do with stretching strings. So you stretch the string more tightly and you get a higher pitch. So there's an intensification of the pitch. So when a planet is in its exaltation, it is in fact said to be intensified. But I maintain, and I haven't finished this work yet, so I probably shouldn't even be saying it. I mean, some things I do are completely crazy, I think, would seem like it to other people. I believe that in the framework of this music theory, the exaltations and depressions will turn out to represent sharps and flats that give you the different, the various different musical scales that the Greeks had. So that there is, in fact, I believe, a well-worked-out music of the spheres paradigm that is lying there in wait behind the And I haven't finished this work. Anyway, so there is definitely a music connection going on here. Not only that, the planets are associated with vowels, the 7 vowels, and this is an old tradition. And the way in which the Greeks understood vowels is that, as opposed to consonants, is that the vowels weren't just sounded. It's not just that your vocal cords would vibrate. It's that vowels were capable of pitch differences. Consonants are not. So vowels would be like pitched sound, but the planets are associated with the vowels. So a planet in its exaltation is like it's being pitched, sharp, flatted.
Made to stand out in some way.
That's right.
And so this is and if it's depressed, that may mean that you could think of it as being like a diminished chord.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Which certainly it's interesting. It adds flavor to music. You don't want to be listening to major
right.
chords all day long. You want to hear them made interesting, made more.
That's right.
Wistful.
That's
and
right.
Things like this.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and it's
so this to me is very exciting. I mean, I haven't finished my work in it, but I tell you, Eric. I mean, the depths to this material are they're almost beyond imagining. I mean, when I first started in this stuff, I was hoping that there would be something in them to justify the time I was taking to do the translations. But the further I got into it, I've never seen anything like this. This highly integrated system of concepts, all of these paradigms, like musical paradigms, language paradigms, everything worked together here in this absolutely extraordinary system. I mean, I've been reading, relatively difficult or complicated books all my life, particularly works in philosophy, but I've never seen anything like this, ever. I mean, I'm still dumbfounded by it.
Yes. So we're heir to something really quite brilliant, as even in its adulterated forms. There's some of this elegance that.
It's still. I mean, modern astrologers still use signs, planets, aspects, houses. They don't use them in the same way, and then they've lost all sorts of timing methods. I mean, the Greeks did have what we would call directions and even secondary progressions, but there are so many timing procedures that just didn't make it, and all of those, by the way, also have their own systematic arrangement. So everything is systematic, everything, and that's gratifying to me, because insofar as it's systematic, you begin to get an idea of how to interpret it. Yeah. Like all these different Time Lord procedures that we've known about since 1994, what people do is they just have a bunch of them at their disposal, and they just try to, I'm going to use this and see what, and I'm going to use that. What they don't realize is that some of them are context specific, some of them are to be used together and others not. And so in my opinion, at the risk of insulting many of your listeners, I mean, I think modern astrologers are technique mad, and are just, the more techniques, the better. I mean, why? Well, I'm not getting a good result here. Try another technique. Oh, that one worked. I mean, maybe that's not fair, but that's what it seems to be to me a lot of times.
Yeah. Okay. So the parallel equivalent in music is, all the music theory in the world does not get you a beautiful song.
Right. Yeah.
You can use some theory.
Yeah.
To help you move around, or there's always one person in the band who can tell you the difference between the major, minor seventh and a major seventh and all this, but ultimately something else is composing the music, and the theory is really just explaining what was done.
Yeah.
And I think with astrology we need a balance, as in most arts. Between left and right hemisphere thinking. Yeah. Right, because the Greeks are famous for having left hemisphere dominance. I mean, the book, you're saying that Socrates was, Plato was suspicious of the book as a thing.
Yes, the written book.
And when you look at the work of Marshall McLuhan talking about what that did to us, McLuhan's theory is that the printed alphabet, phonetic alphabet in particular, pushed the visual sense so hard that we created subject-object division, and therefore self versus other. I am me, and this is the tribe. We are different things. He is saying that this was pushed by the visual sense, which was engaged by the phonetic alphabet.
I mean, that's certainly an interesting hypothesis. I haven't heard Marshall McLuhan's name for how many years?
Well, if you're listening to Planet Waves, he every week, and I his son and grandson are, helping me. The first person I'm going to send this to is Eric McLuhan, by the way, in case you're
really?
wondering.
Okay.
Because it's right in his field of interest, especially your ideas about the Greeks, which are, I'm reading the Laws of Media, which is talking about, well, hold on.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just find my bookmark in Laws of Media, which is deeply invested in understanding the Greeks' thinking about the creation of visual ground from the alphabet, the dominance of the rational brain, what we call the left brain, and the suppression of the right brain by this intense use of concept and mathematics and these beautiful, elegant structures. The other side of the brain wants to get in on it, and
I've been emphasizing the systematic, rational, logical character of this, whatever you want to call it, which is certainly there, but I don't want to imply that the reading of a chart using Greek methods, even if they're fully understood, would ever be something that could be done mechanically.
Yes, this is so important.
And I don't think it was intended to be used that way. I think that, you've read charts, and many of your listeners have read charts. When I've read charts, and I see the whole concept structure that's going on here, and running through the chart and looking at the things that you have to look at from the point of view of a Greek thing, it's a kind of preparation of the mind for the kind of magical things that can happen in readings.
Yes.
And it's sort of like going through your kata or something. You know what I mean? It's a preparatory exercise, and then I'm sure it happens to all astrologers. All of a sudden, a question comes into your mind, that you don't even know why you brought the question up and asked the person that. I was doing a chart for an old friend of mine, a woman I went to high school with, and she's crazy about horses, okay, and has been all the time. But she also was involved in these hunts, where they don't actually have a fox, but they have something that looks like a fox, and people get on the horses and chase it. And so there's a whole culture that does this. And so she's been involved with horses and that type of thing all of her life. So after I reestablished contact with her after almost 40 years, and I'm looking at her chart, and I'm having a little problem because I might have to rectify something, and I've got to get the sign right. She's right on the border here. So I was asking her some questions, and she had Mars in the ninth. And this isn't really wouldn't even be a standard Greek question, but the question that came into my mind is, do you consider the hunt to be a religious experience?
Mm-hmm.
And she just hesitated, and she told me then the story about the first time she ever heard the hounds baying.
Mm-hmm.
It just went right to the heart of things. I have no idea where that question came from, but I don't think it would have arisen for me if I hadn't done that prep work, and I weren't using the left part of my brain or something, if for no other reason than just to get very secure preparation, so I do. But see, even for the Greeks, we tend to think of them as, maybe overly logical or something, but I don't see them that way.
Mm-hmm.
See, and there's an awful lot of poetry even in their otherwise dry philosophical writing, and visionary things that. It's very clear that Plato, this might not be true of Aristotle, but Plato thinks that there are limitations to what we can achieve or understand using logos or reason alone.
Mm-hmm.
That there are boundaries. We can't get by them, and that's through a rational process simply. there can be other routes. There can be, divine madness. There are certain things that you might be inspired with that you would not have ordinary rational access to.
Yeah, and they had a God for everything. They had a God for everything.
Oh, sure, yes. And then there's the famous from Plato's Symposium, right? Which is basically a drinking party with Aristophanes, the comic playwright, and Plato, or rather in Socrates, were the only ones left standing, by the way, after the end of the drinking party. And, and the statement's made, well, you got to consider everything twice, once drunk and once sober.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot more going on in that Greek world than, and not only that, this quote that we started with Eudoxus, that, he's saying the magic arts are superior. That's not, Eudoxus must have had a really powerful rational intellect, but he's making that statement. Things are not really what they seem, I would say. Anyway,
yeah.
This, of course, is all, my hypothesis that Eudoxus is our man, and I'm sure it's going to be met with storms of protest. And
you just hang out with him for a while. Anybody who's going to get on the picket line, just hang out with Eudoxus for a while. First of all, we could do better than a hedonist mathematician. Worse, rather, than a hedonist mathematician. Because I wrote to my friend, well, he was into math and fucking.
No, he was.
Tell me what a hedonist was. Tell me what a hedonist was in their language.
No, hedone means pleasure, and it is true. It is true that that Eudoxus had a metaphysical view that pleasure was the highest good.
Yes.
That is a view of his.
Yes.
And that's why some people would call him a hedonist. But we have it on the good authority of Aristotle that despite the fact that he held that view, Aristotle says he held it because he thought it was the truth of things, Eudoxus himself was a very temperate man.
Yes,
just for the record.
And there are temperate, yes, I get it, but there are temperate hedonists who take pleasure in being temperate and in going to work every day, and
certainly,
and believe in moderation as a path to hedonism. You can't have that much fun if you're drunk all the time because you're going to lose your
absolutely
house.
True.
You don't have a bed to sleep in after a while, or you peed in it too many times.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, this has been fucking glorious. So thank you. Speaking
it's
of fucking,
fun. It's always fun talking to you, Eric.
All right.
So
I'm glad you feel that way.
We'll do it again at some point.
Well,
I
think the houses discussion is a beautiful one because it's a topic dear to my heart, and I think that it's being overly simplified by the fundamentalist Republican classical astrologers.
I am certain of that, and I presented an argument. Okay, I at least hope somebody will address my argument. Maybe it's wrong. I don't think so. But the thing that I don't understand is I actually gave a justification for the use of whole sign houses. I gave a justification for it. It's just that the interpretation of them is subtler than has been recognized.
Yep.
Just briefly, you've got a whole sign place, but you have to take into account the cusp of the equal place there, because it's dividing the whole sign place into two completely different sectors,
yes,
which have a completely different character.
Yes.
And I try. I'm partly responsible for the whole sign house movement. Simply because we found all kinds of texts that were talking about whole sign places.
Yeah.
But you cannot conclude from the prevalence of whole sign places in different texts that they were either the original system or the dominant system. In fact, that's not really even true. There are all kinds of references to a system of equal places. Firmicus Maternus, Valens, this anonymous papyrus thing, another text that I've never published, Ptolemy. It's all over the place. It has to be accounted for.
Yep.
But everyone is thinking so much, they're variant systems, because we've got variant house systems today.
Yep.
But that would, a Greek isn't going to do that. oh, we're going to have two completely different systems. I mean, that would be like a terrible flaw.
Right. So you're saying
we're talking about Greeks here.
They overlay. See, I've had the best results. You there, Bob?
Yeah, I'm here.
I've had the best results using whole signs when I cast. I don't cast the chart specially with whole sign houses.
Yeah.
I just look at them beneath the layer of the houses that I'm using, and I can kind of flash back and forth between the whole sign place and I use Koch houses, the Koch place, and get a kind of a moving image, a kind of a composite of the two. And sometimes the whole sign place something will come booming out, and sometimes the Koch, the equivalent of whatever, a normal house system.
Yeah.
And when they're overlaid over each other, it's much more elegant. And you're not locked into one interpretation. The chart's offering you options for how to look at something, for one thing. And the Koch house overlaid over the whole sign place is, as I learned from you many years ago, is a peak of the energy within the whole sign place. Cusp means peak. It doesn't mean edge. It means the peak.
It originally means a sharp point.
Yeah.
Okay, but that means like something that will goad something, stimulate it, right? I mean, so those cusps are the idea of a cusp is interesting. One of the big errors I see out there is that people who use whole sign places exclusively tend to think of the sign borders as cusps.
Yep.
They're not cusps.
No.
They're just sign borders.
Yep. No, the degree of the ascendant in each of those is your cusp.
Yeah, exactly. And this is quite simple. And it once I started working it out in more detail, I'm intending to expand that PDF file that was in there. It's about 60 pages or something. I'm intending to expand that into a full monograph, and I have a lot more material to put in there. But I don't understand why there would be resistance to this. I mean, well, I never understand that, but.
Astrologers are a resistant lot. I mean, they really.
Just already, it's there's no justification for this, or and I'm just saying, well, this is what the texts say.
Yeah.
It's not easy to get the concept out because it's in, you have to winkle it out of some of these cryptic texts.
Yep.
But but I think I did that. Anyway, I really like the feel of it. I like the feel of it a lot. Mm-hmm. Now, whether it works or not is a different issue, but that's always the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's an experiment. You got to pick up the guitar and play it at a certain point. Really, I mean,
right. Yeah.
You could talk about it all day, but you're not going to knock out.
Right.
Okay, Bob. Thank you again, truly, from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, and we'll talk again sometime.
All right, and this should be coming out on Tuesday, the 26th. Is tomorrow, right? And
I'm the last person in the world to ask for a date.
Yeah. Well, you've got a date. All right. Thank you again.
Okay.
Hello.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye for now.
Mm-hmm.
Control